All right, welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah,
Today we're tackling a question that I think has been on a lot of people's minds.
sure.
Has China already won the 21st century geopolitical race?
Interesting question.
Our guide for this exploration is Kishore Mahbubani's book,
Okay.
Has China Won?
All right.
It's a really interesting book.
Yeah.
It's
I think he makes,
it's been really making me think about, all of these.
a lot of assumptions that we have
Yeah.
that we don't even realize we have.
Exactly.
How the world actually works.
how the world actually works.
So think of this deep dive as your cheat sheet
Right.
to understanding this global power shift.
Yeah. I think one of the things that Mahbubani does really effectively
Yeah.
is he lays out
Yeah.
a case that many in the West, especially in America,
Yeah.
are just overlooking
Right.
the magnitude and the speed of China's rise.
So like we're clinging to this outdated idea.
The China system is unsustainable.
Yeah.
But then you look at the facts.
Right.
China's economy has gone from a tenth the size of the U.S. economy
Yeah.
just a few decades ago to over 60% today.
Yeah, it's incredible when you think about it
Yeah.
in such a short period of time.
And they're already the world's largest trading nation.
That's right.
It's really...
I mean, the numbers are staggering.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the size.
Right.
It's about the why
Mm-hmm.
China's system has been so effective
Yeah.
because of this unique blend
Okay.
of a meritocratic government and this relentless focus
Yeah.
on delivering tangible results for its people.
Okay.
This isn't just theory.
Yeah.
It's reflected in surveys like the Edelman Trust Barometer,
Mm-hmm.
which consistently shows that the Chinese people
Right.
have remarkably high levels of trust in their government.
Wow. That's a stark contrast to
Yeah.
the political landscape in many Western democracies.
Yeah, for sure.
Imagine living in a society.
It's hard to even fathom it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where you genuinely believe
Right.
your government is working in your best interest.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how that impacts their outlook on the future.
It has to, right.
Yeah.
Their sense of optimism, their sense of national pride.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a really powerful force.
And Mahbubani argues that this internal stability and
Yeah.
confidence
Yes.
allows China to play the long game
Mm-hmm.
in geopolitics.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Unpack that for me.
Okay, yeah.
What does playing the long game
Sure.
look like in practice?
Well, it means China's not rushing
Okay.
to assert dominance through military might,
Mm-hmm.
unlike some past superpowers.
Yeah. Okay.
They're taking a much more strategic approach,
Got it.
prioritizing diplomacy and economic influence,
Okay.
soft power.
So they're not necessarily looking for a fight.
Not in the traditional sense.
Okay.
Mahbubani connects this back to ancient Chinese philosophy,
Oh.
specifically the teachings of Sun Tzu,
Hmm.
who emphasize the importance of winning without fighting.
Right.
Avoiding unnecessary conflict is central to their strategy.
Okay.
Yeah.
But haven't we seen China flexing its military muscles in the South China Sea?
Yeah, I mean, that's where
Does that contradict this idea of restraint?
the nuances come in.
Okay.
While there have been tensions in the South China Sea,
Mm-hmm.
China has also shown a willingness to resolve border disputes peacefully,
Right.
even with neighbors they have fought wars with in the past.
Okay.
This historical context suggests that their approach
Yeah.
is much more complex than a simple desire for territorial expansion.
So while China is strategically expanding its influence,
Right.
they're also being pragmatic
Mhm.
and avoiding unnecessary conflict.
Right.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the Pacific.
Well, Mahbubani argues
Yeah.
that America's actions, particularly in the Middle East, have inadvertently strengthened China's position on the world stage.
Interesting.
He calls these geopolitical gifts.
Geopolitical gifts.
Yeah,
That's an intriguing way to put it.
it is.
What are some examples of these gifts?
Well, think about the Iraq War.
Okay.
Trillions of dollars spent,
Yeah.
regional instability,
Mhm.
and who ultimately benefited
Right.
from the power vacuum?
Yeah.
China.
Right.
They were able to secure access to resources
Yeah.
and expand their economic influence
Right.
while America was bogged down in a costly conflict.
Almost ironic, isn't it?
It is ironic.
The U.S. trying to assert its dominance
Right.
and in the process
Yeah.
paving the way for China's rise.
It's a paradox,
Yeah.
and one that highlights a potential weakness
Okay.
in American strategic thinking.
What do you mean?
Mahbubani points out that U.S. political discourse
Mhm.
is often dominated by short-term thinking
Okay.
and a reluctance to acknowledge
Yeah.
potential vulnerabilities.
Right.
This inability to imagine failure as he puts it,
Yeah.
could have serious consequences in the long run.
So while China is thinking decades ahead,
Yeah.
the U.S. is stuck in a cycle of short-term wins
Yeah, that's what I'm
and long-term losses.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's not just about military might or economic power. It's about a fundamental difference
Yeah.
in their approach to global affairs.
Mm-hmm.
China is playing the long game,
Right.
patiently building relationships
Okay.
and expanding its influence through strategic investments and diplomacy.
And what about the rest of the world?
Good question.
Are they just picking sides in this U.S.-China rivalry?
Not quite.
Okay.
Mahbubani emphasizes that many countries are making strategic decisions based on their own interests rather than blindly siding with one superpower or the other.
Okay.
This challenges the simplistic democracy versus communism narrative that often dominates Western media.
So the world is a bit more complex than just choosing Team USA or Team China.
Much more complex. Each country is navigating this new geopolitical landscape based on their own unique circumstances.
Right.
Australia, for example, is deeply reliant on China economically, even as it maintains close security ties with the U.S.
Right.
Europe needs China's cooperation on issues like climate change and development aid in Africa.
Right.
India is trying to walk a tightrope,
Right.
benefiting from both powers without getting caught in the crossfire.
It sounds like the world is becoming a lot more multipolar,
That's exactly right.
with countries pursuing their own interests rather than simply falling in line behind one superpower.
Precisely. And this leads to one of the more provocative arguments in the book.
Okay, this is where I'm all ears.
All right, so Mahbubani challenges the deeply ingrained belief in American exceptionalism.
Okay.
He argues that U.S. foreign policy has often been self-serving and at times even hypocritical, contradicting the values it claims to champion.
This might make some listeners uncomfortable,
Yeah, I think so.
but I think it's important
But it's important.
to critically examine these assumptions,
Absolutely.
especially if we want to understand how we got to where we are today.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
He uses specific historical examples,
Okay.
like the Philippine-American War and the more recent use of torture in the War on Terror, to illustrate how U.S. actions have sometimes diverged from its stated principles.
It's like there's this gap between the rhetoric and the reality.
Yeah, there is.
And it's interesting that Mahbubani connects this global power struggle to the very real struggles of everyday Americans.
Yeah.
He argues that the U.S. focus on individual freedom has come at the expense of equality, leading to rising inequality and a decline of the middle class.
Which raises a crucial question.
Okay.
What do other countries see when they look at America today? Is it still that shining city on a hill?
Or is the reality a bit more complicated?
That's what we're going to explore.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the shiny facade is starting to show some cracks.
Right.
Mahbubani points out that the average income of the bottom 50% of Americans has actually declined over the past 3 decades.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking.
It makes you wonder if that's the reality for so many Americans, what message does it send to the rest of the world?
Yeah, that's precisely the point Mahbubani drives home.
Okay.
He argues that America's inability to address its own internal challenges, particularly economic inequality, undermines its moral authority on the global stage.
So it's not just about China's rise.
Right.
It's also about America's own self-inflicted wounds.
Exactly. Mahbubani isn't letting China off the hook either.
Okay.
He acknowledges they've made their share of mistakes.
Like what?
For instance, he points to China's handling of its economic rise, particularly its approach to the American business community.
What do you mean? What did they do?
Well, there's this perception that China hasn't always played fair, that they've pressured foreign companies to transfer technology as a condition of doing business there.
Right.
This created a sense of distrust and contributed to the hardening of attitudes towards China in the U.S.
So instead of building bridges and fostering trust, they might have alienated a key player.
You could say that, and it's something China will need to address if they want to build a more stable and cooperative relationship with the U.S.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But going back to America's internal challenges for a second.
Sure.
Is there a specific example from the book that illustrates this point about America losing its moral authority?
Mahbubani actually cites John Rawls, the American political philosopher who wrote A Theory of Justice. Rawls argued for a just society that prioritizes the well-being of its least advantaged members. Mahbubani uses Rawls' framework
to critique modern America, suggesting that it has strayed from this ideal.
I see. So it's not just about economic indicators. It's about a perceived decline in social justice and fairness.
Precisely. And this connects back to Mahbubani's argument about America's foreign policy. Remember how we discussed China's relative restraint militarily? Well, Mahbubani contends that America's interventions, especially in the Middle East, have actually done more to boost China's standing than any Chinese policy ever could.
So by trying to assert its dominance, America might have actually undermined its own position.
That's the argument.
It's like stepping on a rake and hitting yourself in the face.
Yeah, it's a paradoxical outcome. And one that Mahbubani calls a paradoxical conclusion. But it's important to remember, he's not saying that China has automatically won.
Got it. So it's not a simple victory lap for China.
No.
There's a lot more nuance to the situation. Exactly. But Mahbubani highlights that China's system has shown itself to be remarkably adaptable. He even points to the Chinese Communist Party, despite its name, as having evolved into a highly effective meritocratic governing system.
Hold on, the Communist Party is meritocratic. That seems counterintuitive.
It does, but that's precisely Mahbubani's argument. He says they're constantly evaluating, adapting, and promoting based on results, not just ideology. And this focus on competence has been a key factor in their success, both domestically and on the world stage.
So they've managed to create a system that combines elements of autocracy with a surprisingly effective meritocratic structure.
That's right. Mahbubani calls it an autocracy with democratic characteristics. And it's a system that has proven to be very effective in delivering economic growth and maintaining social stability.
This brings up a lot of uncomfortable questions for those of us in the West.
Yeah, for sure.
What if this system, which we've long dismissed as unsustainable, actually turns out to be more resilient in the long run?
It's a possibility we need to consider. And it's not just about the U.S. and China. This power shift has implications for the entire world.
We talked earlier about how other countries are navigating this new landscape.
Exactly.
It's not just about picking sides. It's about finding their own path.
Exactly. The reality is far more nuanced than the Cold War 2.0 scenario that some people are predicting.
So no Iron Curtain 2.0?
Not quite. Countries are hedging their bets, building relationships with both the U.S. and China, and trying to maximize their own interests.
Is there an example of a country that's doing this particularly well?
Mahbubani points to Singapore. Despite being a tiny island nation, they've managed to thrive by carefully navigating the great power dynamics.
They're kind of masters of realpolitik, aren't they?
You could say that. And this is where things get really interesting for the listener. Because this isn't just an abstract geopolitical game. This power shift has the potential to impact your life in very tangible ways.
Now you've got my attention.
All right, how so? Think about the global economy, trade technology. The decisions that the U.S. and China make will have ripple effects across the world. It will impact jobs, the cost of goods, and even the future of innovation.
So we're all interconnected in this global web, whether we realize it or not.
Precisely. And the question is, how do we navigate this new reality? How do we avoid getting caught in a zero-sum game where one side's win is automatically the other side's loss?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
Is there even a way for the U.S. and China to coexist peacefully while they're competing for power and influence?
Mahbubani believes there is, but it requires a fundamental shift in thinking, a move away from outdated assumptions and simplistic narratives.
Like the us versus them mentality that we see so often.
Exactly. We need to recognize that the world is becoming more complex than these binary frameworks allow.
So we need to move beyond these old patterns of thinking.
But
how do we do that?
It starts with understanding the other side.
Okay.
Their motivations, their fears, their aspirations. Because at the end of the day, both the U.S. and China faced many of the same challenges.
Right.
Climate change, economic inequality, technological disruption.
These are global problems that required global solutions.
Absolutely. And instead of viewing each other as existential threats, what if they could find ways to collaborate?
Okay.
To leverage their strengths for the common good?
That's a pretty radical idea, but I like it.
It is radical.
It's like taking the high road instead of getting bogged down in conflict.
It is. But it might be the only way forward. If we want to create a more stable and prosperous future for everyone, and this brings us to one of the most thought-provoking questions Mahbubani poses in the book.
All right, lay it on me. What's the question?
What if, instead of fixating on dominance, both the U.S. and China prioritized improving the well-being of their people? Wouldn't the entire world benefit from such a shift?
It's a compelling question.
It is.
It challenges us to imagine a world where cooperation, not competition, is the driving force behind global progress. But is that even realistic, given the current state of affairs?
Mahbubani uses a powerful analogy to illustrate this point.
Okay.
He asks us to imagine two tribes of apes fiercely fighting over territory. While the forest around them burns uncontrollably.
Okay, I'm picturing it. It feels a bit too close to home right now.
Exactly. He argues this is essentially what humanity is doing with climate change. We're so consumed by our own conflicts and rivalries that we're neglecting this existential threat that impacts us all.
And it's not just about who's emitting more carbon today.
Right.
It's also about acknowledging the historical responsibility for the emissions that got us into this mess in the first place.
Mahbubani points out that while China is currently the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, the U.S. bears a significant responsibility for the cumulative emissions that have led to climate change. It's a reminder that this is not about assigning blame, but about recognizing shared responsibility and the urgent need for collective action.
It makes you wonder, are we as a species intelligent enough to set aside our differences and address this global crisis that ultimately threatens us all?
That's the challenge before us. And it's a challenge that goes beyond climate change.
Okay.
It's about recognizing our interconnectedness and finding ways to collaborate on the global issues that transcend national borders.
This all sounds very grand and important.
It is.
But I think our listeners might be wondering, what does this mean for me? I'm not a world leader. I can't single-handedly solve climate change or reshape global power dynamics.
You're right. But that doesn't mean we're powerless.
Okay.
Mahbubani's book is a call to action for all of us, not just politicians and diplomats.
Okay.
He argues that we can all play a role in shaping a better future by becoming more informed and engaged citizens.
So what can we do? Give us some concrete steps.
Start by questioning the narratives we're being fed.
Okay.
Especially those that promote fear, division, and simplistic solutions. Engage with diverse perspectives, seek out information from credible sources, and be wary of propaganda and misinformation.
Basically, we need to become more critical thinkers and resist the urge to just accept everything we hear at face value.
Exactly.
Okay.
And don't underestimate the power of individual action. Support organizations working to address climate change.
Advocate for policies that promote global cooperation and make conscious choices in your own life that align with your values.
It sounds like Mahbubani is encouraging us to think globally, but act locally.
Precisely.
Okay.
And remember, change starts with individual awareness. By educating ourselves about the forces shaping our world, we empower ourselves to make informed decisions and contribute to a more just and sustainable future.
That's a much more hopeful message than just passively accepting that China has already won. Or that the world is inevitably headed for conflict.
Absolutely. Mahbubani's book is not meant to be a pessimistic prediction of the future, but a wake-up call, urging us to rethink our assumptions and actively engage in shaping the world we want to live in.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Has China Won? I think the key takeaway is this. The world is changing in profound ways.
It is.
And we all have a role to play in navigating this new reality.
We do.
China's rise is undeniable.
America needs to engage in some serious self-reflection. And the future is far more complex than any simple narrative can capture.
It's a future that will be shaped not just by powerful nations, but by informed and engaged citizens around the world.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We hope it's given you some food for thought.
Definitely.
And perhaps even a little bit of hope.
Yeah.
Now go out there, explore these ideas further, challenge your assumptions, and engage in the conversations that will shape our collective future.
Thank you for tuning in to the Power Book of Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join our growing community. Click the bell icon so you never miss an update. We have so much more inspiring content coming your way.